operating agreements, contracts, business formation. Shira Truitt of the Truitt Law Firm is here to discuss critical issues in business law. Starting and owning a business presents challenges for most people, and the process of maintaining that business and managing all of the paperwork and the finances certainly is not easy for the average person. Where does an attorney come into the picture if I want to start my business?
An attorney, like the ones at the Truitt Law Firm, come into play when you initially begin thinking about your business. We start you off correctly. We help you conceptualize the entire thing so that it is on paper the way you envision it, and it meets all the requirements that are for the state as well as what you anticipate further down the road.
That involves knowing, well, first having a business plan. Is that part of your work?
We can certainly help with the business plan, and I have helped with several business plans before. But it also involves us getting the right paperwork with the state. It also involves putting an operating agreement together. A lot of times people believe that once you file with the state, you're a business. And that may be technically so, but you also need an operating agreement in some banks to have a bank account and to do other things to let you know how the business is actually going to run. Not how you think it's going to run in your head, but on paper for your eyeballs to take to your brain on how this is going to actually work.
Who is this agreement with? I'm agreeing with whom?
You're agreeing not just with yourself, but with any other partners that you have. So as a solo person, for example, if you were just a single person in an organization, you still want an operating agreement because that tells how decisions are going to be made. If you have more than one person, you certainly want an operating agreement because that tells how profits are going to be split. That tells who makes the final decision. That tells, do we have an even vote? Especially if there's an even number of people, how do you vote something in or out? So it takes care of those things in advance before anything happens. It's done in a way so that it's proactive rather than reactive. You know what's going to happen once you have an operating agreement. It acts as insurance for how the business is supposed to be run.
What's an LLC? Or there are differences, I know, on that level. Explain how that works.
Part of how a business operates is a tax formation, and part of it is liability shielding. Okay, so a limited liability corporation is for liability shielding. It mainly functions as an organization where everything that is done in that business's name is done in that business's name. So if the business gets sued, for example, you can only get the assets of that business if the work is properly drawn and if you're doing this correctly. If you commingle, you can do it. There are a whole lot of other things that you can do to negate that, and that's why you come to a lawyer, because there are things that you could do to negate your LLC. For example, you commingle money, you get into something where you're the alter ego of the organization. There are a lot of things that can happen. You're undercapitalized, so you took on a job that was $1 million job and you defaulted on it and you only have, $100,000. Those are things that may negate your LLC and therefore pierce you for liability purposes. And when you go to an attorney, that attorney is supposed to help you with that and help you understand what to do and what not to do so that you are properly protected.
Limited liability partnerships. What's the difference?
So a limited liability company and a limited liability partnership. A partnership has more than one person in it, and they're in a partnership for the purpose of making a profit. A company does not have to be a partnership itself. You can be a single member limited liability company, but if you're a partnership, you're a limited liability partnership in which you have a duty to the other partners in the organization. That's different from the company structure.
A joint venture, how is that different from a partnership? It sounds almost the same. Joint, we're together. Partnership, we're together. What's the difference?
There are huge differences between a joint venture and a partnership. A partnership, you have a duty to your partner. In a joint venture, however, that's just two companies that come together for one particular purpose. My duty extends usually, depending on how the joint venture paperwork is drawn up, my duty extends to that venture alone. So if what we're going to do is own a company for rocks, and we're going to sell rocks, for the purpose of making roads, you break rocks, we're just going to go together, we're going to buy those rocks. But it doesn't say that I can't go into partnership or into another joint venture with another organization, for example. So you maintain your separateness in a joint venture. It's just two companies that come together for one idea, one purpose. Whereas a corporation or a company, they're all together in one.
A 501c3 if I want to do nonprofit?
Yes, so that is a tax structure, and there are a lot of rules that go along with that. And what you're doing there is putting together not just for the IRS, but you also have to file the correct paperwork with the state of Missouri so that you are not taxed and that you follow all the rules. Those take a lot of time to put together, but when they're done properly, you can reap a wonderful reward for what you're doing.
There are a number of people, I'm sure, who might be thinking about starting a business now, given the fact that COVID-19 has forced them out of their current employment.
Sure.
They may be working for a corporation, major corporation, but they've been laid off, or they're working for a restaurant. What if they want to go out and start their own business?
I think it could certainly increase because there are always people who have opportunities elsewhere. And with the changes that come with COVID, there are quite a few dark clouds, but there are some silver linings that people are able to find. And so with them being able to find that particular thing that works for them and for their economy and for where they are, they may be able to do something. But there are pitfalls for that. So for example, you can't just start a business in your own home because it may not be zoned correctly. You can't just decide that you're going to have people in and out of the home because there's zoning issues, there are traffic issues, there are parking issues and things of that nature. And depending on where you are, you may need a permit to have a business in your home or at all. Mm-hmm. Some municipalities and some parts of St. Louis County do require that, some don't. So it depends on where you are and what rules are in place. And that's why you need a firm like the Truitt Law Firm, where we look those things up for you and help you see what your options are for what you're trying to do.
There are a list of services on your website that seem probably a little more simple than starting a business. A contract negotiation, breach of contract, breach of fiduciary duty. Can you elaborate on some of these other items?
Sure. So sometimes you just need people to help you do one thing. And so for businesses, for example, that are already established, those businesses don't need a full-time attorney on board. They pay as they go. And what they do is they retain services. They retain firms like mine to work with them as they need and as they see fit. So we will advise them as things go along. Sometimes they have questions about things. So sometimes they just want you to help negotiate or draft a contract. They've already agreed in principle on what the assets are going to be and what the subject is going to be, but contracts need to be in writing for enforcement purposes. Mm-hmm. You have to draft them tight enough so that they are properly enforced if anything happens. Think of a contract just like insurance. You should be able to wake up in the middle of the night and know exactly what your duties are and exactly what you're supposed to do. Because if a new opportunity comes along, you need to know whether or not you're in violation of the contract by accepting the new opportunity, or if you're allowed to under the contract. So do we compete? Can I compete against a contract that I have? Can I open 2 Burger Kings with 2 different people? 2 franchises with 2 different groups? Or will I only be allowed to open 1? What if that particular franchise, one sells food and the other sells hardware? Can we do that? So there are things that have to go into those negotiations that you have to know, and you put those things in so that you're protected if it ever comes to it. We always hope, just like any insurance purposes, you hope that it never comes to that. But if it does, you want the language to be crisp and clear.
I'm going back to partnerships. If I have a partner who dies suddenly, maybe a victim of COVID-19, what happens to the business?
That will depend on what your operating agreement says. And it will also depend on other state laws. So, for example, if you have an operating agreement, that party has joined into that operating agreement and signed it to alienate or give his share of the business to his partners, then that's how it would go, except for that, you can't disinherit people. Let's say that business is worth $100,000 and there are 5 partners, which means that each partner has about $20,000 apiece. The worth of that one person's is $20,000. There needs to be a determination as to what's going to happen. Are the partners going to pay the widow and they get their $20,000? Or does that person inherit, the widow or the child inherit part of that business? And how does that work? Do we have an option to where the partners can buy out, in other words, the other partnership for whatever reason? And how does that work? And to whom is it offered? You have to put all of those things into an operating agreement, because if we all own 1/5 of that business, someone who owns 2/5 because they had the $20,000, is that fair to everybody? Or do we absorb it? And you want to know those kinds of things in advance so that when things happen, because they do, because life happens, you know what reasonably can happen. We can't predict everything. We certainly couldn't have predicted COVID-19. But there are things that are in place that can happen, and there are advice that we can offer. So things like business interruption insurance, there is such a thing. And you can buy certain insurances to make sure that your business, so there's not just malpractice insurance. There's business interruption insurance. There is liability insurance. There is cancer insurance. There is insurance life insurance, where you insure the partner's life for the value, his portion of the value of the business. Those are all options that business owners have to make sure that their business runs and functions the way they intend.
Okay. You make me think that people probably jump into business, small business, not knowing these things, and find themselves in a jam after a while. Or does that happen?
That does happen at times, and it's always more difficult and more expensive to straighten something out, because we've got to get you straight, and that means I've got to get you to the point at which you should have been, and then get you to where you need to be. That just becomes more expensive. It is easier and it is better to come early, like with anything else, earlier the better kind of thing. But sometimes you don't know that it's going to be a small business. Sometimes it was just, a side thing. So like people have side hustles kind of thing. And I can bring more in when I need it, and I can, decrease my share when I don't want to have more business, because maybe I have a full-time job. So it doesn't always start off as a thought that I'm just going to run this business. A lot of times these things come in, the kids that's raking the leaves, for example. That may not always evolve into a lawn care business, but sometimes it does. And he's been doing it forever. Now it's just a business. And so at that point, when you realize those things, you come in to a firm like the Truitt Law Firm, and we can help you take care of those things, get you where you want to be so that you can go where you need to be. Under the advent of COVID-19, business as usual will change and will not go back to what it was. The silver lining to the very dark cloud that is COVID-19 does produce some opportunities for businesses, and it won't be business as usual. It has produced opportunities for those who are disabled, because they cannot participate because perhaps they have accessibility issues and things of that nature that have been overcome by being able to use video conferencing. Organizations have been able to streamline things. They've found ways to fundraise, and they found ways to engage their audiences in a way that makes sense for them by using new technology, or new to them technology, and engage people. So those things will change. Currently, businesses need to focus on convenience and reliability to deliver to the public at large. And what I mean by that is people are used now to staying at home and having things conveniently done. People will still gather, there will still be concerts, and there will still be things that happen, but they'll only happen in a way that makes sense to people. This is a time in which you retool your business and you pivot so that you can take advantage of the opportunities that arise from that kind of situation.
And so you will help guide that business owner to make
Yes.
that change and make that adjustment?
And we talk strategically. When I have businesses that I advise, I talk strategically with them. What makes the most sense right now, and how are you going to change that? And what is there for the long term for you, and how is that sustainable for you? So you've always got to manage value versus profit and delivery. And that's always going to be sort of the balls that are in the air for any business. But it's got to make sense in an authentic way for that business. So these plans aren't necessarily what you tell everybody. You have to listen to that business owner and decide how they want to do it, how they can authentically be themselves and work within the framework that is today.
So the Truitt Law Firm is a business that is committed to helping businesses thrive and survive.
The Truitt Law Firm is committed to working with small businesses in the St. Louis metropolitan area.